Why didn't I think of that? The world is full of examples of instances when this lament strikes us, whether it's a piece of corrugated cardboard to wrap around a paper coffee cup, or a plain stone called a pet rock, or the insight that informs a scholar that the earth is truly not the center of the universe, or the intuition that causes a great general to violate every textbook prescription and attack at the proper moment when the enemy least expects. It may be counterintuitive. It may go against what everyone else knows is conventional wisdom. This flash of insight operates in the business world, in the military, in sports, in science, and in politics. It is what separates the merely good strategists from the great. It's rare, and yet it's prevalent enough to have garnered a name. Perhaps showing his admiration for Napoleon, Karl von Clausewitz called this quality of strategic insight coup d'oeil. This is a French phrase that means stroke of the eye. Coup d'oeil is the flash of insight that propels us to launch a strategic idea. This coup d'oeil goes by other names as well: intuition, instinct, sixth sense. Whether this strategic glance can be cultivated or trained over time is a question that has been debated for centuries. Is it a form of genius, or is it a skill that can be learned? Traditionally, this notion of the flash of insight at the proper time and place has been thought mysterious, even a form of extrasensory perception, and perhaps unfathomable. But this idea that intuition is inaccessible has undergone a radical reassessment in recent years. We used to think of analysis and intuition as two distinctly different processes, but now scientists believe that there is a single mode of thought that combines analysis and intuition. Scientists call this new model intelligent memory, and it operates as creative insight, in which the brain assembles existing pieces of information and combines them in novel ways. This, of course, is the very essence of business strategy as defined by Harvard business professor Michael Porter. And in science, Thomas Kuhn, the great philosopher of science, contended that the scientific method starts with a profound respect for past achievements that the scientist then combines in a flash of insight. We have these commonalities across disciplines. In chess, it is the quality shared by all great masters, the flash of insight that leads to beautiful and elegant combinations for victory, patterns of interaction that elude the majority of us, but once shown to us, we see them so clearly. What's new and what concerns us here and now is the idea of intuition as a quality that can be cultivated. Can strategic insight be cultivated? Can we develop coup d'oeil? Perhaps we can. The latest research suggests just that. Under certain conditions, we can cultivate our own abilities to achieve insight in certain circumstances. We can certainly evaluate the circumstances that lead to the flash of insight. And then we can strive to create those conditions ourselves. Let's first look at how the experts tell us to make decisions. Second, we look at several examples of coup d'oeil in action. Third, we review what the latest research says. And finally, we learn some easy steps to cultivate our propensity to receive that blinding insight at the moment we need it most. We have several models of decision-making that have been developed by bright minds with the best of intentions. Decision-making models can be illustrated with flow charts, decision points, and arrows, giving the process a kind of scientific precision. We all like to think of ourselves as smart, rational people, and the idea of our thinking process as being scientific, well, that's good for the ego. The process usually goes something like this. We analyze the problem. We list our different options. We evaluate all of our options against common criteria and weight the criteria as to importance. We add it all up. Voila! The decision is made for us. Well, for lots of folks, this is desirable. As one academic has said, well, who wouldn't want to be thorough, systematic, rational, and scientific? This four-step process, or one much like it, it permeates decision-making in business. But this model of decision-making is more honored in the breach than in the observance. Procedures can take on a life of their own, and they persist even when experience shows them to be lacking. Strategic theorist William Duggan teaches at Columbia University's Business School, and he advises the U.S. military on decision-making theory. He points out the gap. Quote, decision makers only use this four-step method if they have to, if official procedures make them do it. When left to their own devices, they use strategic intuition, and the more complex or the more unfamiliar a situation, the more they must do so. Yet there seems to be something sacred in the world of planning about this four-step method, and about the second step especially, generate multiple solutions. Here again, some of our finest analysis comes from the military, which first recognized the importance of strategic intuition and gave it equal prominence with analytical decision-making. It divided decision-making into two separate modes, and it cited two different situations where the two types of thought are appropriate. First, the analytical approach. This approach serves well when time is available to analyze all facets affecting the problem and its solution. However, analytical decision-making consumes time, and it doesn't work well in all situations, especially during execution when circumstances often require immediate decisions. Second, intuitive decision-making. This is appropriate when we don't have time. It speeds up decision-making. Intuitive decision-making doesn't work well when the situation includes inexperienced leaders, complex or unfamiliar situations, or competing courses of action. Until the 21st century, this was the official military view, these two separate processes. But the latest research shows us a quite different reality. As Gary Klein shows us, expert decision makers do not generate multiple options and then pick one. They do something very different. Expert decision makers study a situation, step A, and the problem and solution come to them at the same time, step B. They think through the implications to arrive at a course of action, step C, and then they commit to it or they reject it if they think it will not work, step D. This type of decision-making has been ridiculed by many folks enamored of the more scientific model, calling it flying by the seat of one's pants. But in an earlier century, it was the subject of a more elegant phrase, the stroke of the eye, coup d'oeil. Karl von Clausewitz was ahead of his time in many ways with much of his thought on conflict between nations. His thoughts on what he called military genius appear as fresh today as when he first penned them more than 170 years ago. Clausewitz, he tried to explain exactly how the greatest military commanders made their most brilliant decisions during the hottest of battles, where nothing is certain. Conflict is the realm of chance, said Clausewitz. No other human activity gives it greater scope. No other has such incessant and varied dealings with this intruder. Chance makes everything uncertain and interferes with the whole course of events. So, rising to the challenge is the quality of military genius, which consists of two equal parts. Quote, an intellect that even in the darkest hour retains some glimmerings of the inner light which leads to truth. And second, the courage to follow this faint light wherever it may lead. Coup d'oeil is a French word, and it may create an unnecessary halo effect over the quality itself. So let's talk about strategic intuition in more straightforward terms so that we can better come to grips with it. According to William Duggan, strategic intuition consists in the, quote, selective projection of past elements into the future in a new combination as a course of action that might or might not fit your previous goals, with the personal commitment to follow through and work out the details along the way. It's no coincidence that this definition fits very closely with Porter's definition of strategy as doing things differently. The assembly of resources in new and imaginative ways to achieve a competitive advantage. We have so many advanced methods of analysis and decision-making today that we sometimes forget that they're aids to problem solving. They're not the problem solvers themselves. Human beings are the problem solvers. Let's consider the principles of strategy for a moment as the equivalent of acquiring what we call in business best practices. If everyone observes best practices, then the efficiency frontier is pushed out and no one achieves sustained competitive advantage. Everyone achieves competitive parity in the longer run as knowledge is diffused. We can even call it a form of arbitrage. But in the short run, even temporary competitive advantage can be a powerful tonic. It can be enough to win a battle or two or three. In war, in business, in politics and sports, it can sometimes be enough. So the question remains, how do you obtain even fleeting competitive advantage when everyone has read the book of strategy? If, for instance, every general practices the art of war as drawn from a well-known body of strategic theory, then on what axle does the wheel of victory turn? Does the outcome then become a simple mathematical calculation? It becomes a matter to which leaders apply strategic intuition. So what happens when both sides of a conflict are both steeped in the military strategy of the time, when officers from both sides are schooled in the latest theory and opposing each other on the field of battle, applying those theories against each other? Do we have such a case? As a matter of fact, we do. The American Civil War. The Civil War is a superb example of a case that comes close to being a controlled experiment to test our notion of strategic intuition versus strategy as a checklist. Few times in history will two sides in a conflict be staffed with officers schooled as classmates at the same military academy, taught the same theories by the same instructors, and having served with each other in a previous major conflict, and with the battles fought over ground increasingly familiar to both sides. The Civil War offers a 4-year skein of battles, great and small, in which the theories of strategy of the day were tested and tested again. In such a conflict, we might expect that with so many things being equal, that objective factors would win the day. We might be able to simply tote up the objective factor endowments of each side and predetermine a victor. In the Civil War, for instance, the North was possessed of overwhelming superiority in almost every category that we use to measure military power. It was a conflict between a modern industrial society versus an agrarian economy. The North possessed tremendous advantages in population, in territory, armories, industrial production, naval power, railroad mileage. In such a conflict, a reasonable person might conclude that the outcome should not be in doubt. Moreover, such a conflict ought to end quickly. Most observers at the time thought it would end quickly in the North's favor. But it did not end quickly. It lasted 4 years, and it took more than 600,000 lives. For much of the conflict, its outcome was in doubt. In fact, at times, a Southern victory appeared within reach. We can look to strategy and strategic thinking to explain this counterintuitive result. We look specifically to the factor of strategic insight, or coup d'oeil, to explain the unexplainable. This insight has both tactical and strategic applications. It is the insight of when, at the crucial moment in a battle, to strike at a particular position, or to fall back to a new position. Such insight has a strategic element in planning and instinctual foresight granted by experience, and some say by providence. It offers a lightning strike of insight when to diverge from strategic doctrine as commonly practiced, of when to break the rules in ways unimagined by lesser